Welcome to the program. My name's Chris Young and I'm one of the park rangers here at Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park. Today we're going to tackle an uncomfortable and divisive topic concerning African Americans who took up arms to serve as soldiers fighting for the Confederacy during the Civil War. Unfortunately, we only have a short time together, so we're going to focus on a local resident who fits this category. A little over a year ago, while filming a program about William Lewis, I visited his grave here in Forest Hill Cemetery at the base of Lookout Mountain outside the small community of St. Elmo. A pointed headstone caught my eye, which was intriguing, as this type of headstone denotes Confederate soldiers' burials, yet it was in the cemetery's historic African American section. The name carved on the stone is that of Clark Lee, a rank, a unit, and company designation, and a listing of the battles, which includes Chickamauga and Lookout Mountain, is also etched on his stone. I heard of Clark Lee many years ago, but this encounter with Lee sparked a renewed interest in his story and about how he came to receive a Confederate headstone. So I began exploring his service to the Confederacy and in what capacity he served the 1st Confederate Georgia Infantry. During my research, I found that Lee's story was not an obscure one in the area. Newspaper articles, wayside markers, and even a locally published book can be found. However, the sources used to validate Lee's service to the Confederacy have been misused and misinterpreted. Today, I'll attempt to walk us through the process of the research that solidified Clark Lee as an enslaved man, and that his service was to the one who brought him into the Army, not to the Confederate government and cause for which it fought. Clark Lee's name is not listed among the white soldiers who served under arms as members of the 1st Confederate Infantry. That's because he was enslaved. His enslaver's name was James M. Lee, who in 1860 lived in Ringgold, Georgia with his wife and young son. According to the 1860 slave schedule, James Lee enslaved 12 men, women, and children, one of whom was Clark Lee. We're now standing in Chickamauga battlefield at the regimental marker for the 2nd Battalion of the 1st Confederate Georgia Infantry. As the thirst for war grew, it finally boiled over, and Georgia seceded on January 29, 1861. The first paragraph of Georgia's Declaration of the Causes of Secession painted a clear picture as to why the state decided to sever its ties with the United States. The Declaration stated, "The people of Georgia, having dissolved their political connection with the government of the United States of America, present to their Confederates and to the world the causes which have led to the separation. For the last 10 years, we've had numerous and serious causes of complaint against our non-slaveholding Confederate states with reference to the subject of African slavery. They've endeavored to weaken our security, to disturb our domestic peace and tranquility, and persistently refused to comply with their express constitutional obligations to us in reference to that property. And by the use of their power in the federal government, they have striven to deprive us of an equal enjoyment of the common territories of the Republic." On July 8, 1861, James Clark Gordon enlisted in Company H of the 26th Tennessee Infantry for a 12-month period and was soon elected its captain. He was subsequently captured at Fort Donelson on February 16, 1862, and was eventually exchanged. He then became the captain of Company I, 1st Confederate Georgia Infantry Regiment. Gordon was appointed the unit's major on November 25, 1862. By August 1863, he found himself on duty with the 2nd Battalion, 1st Confederate Regiment at Chattanooga, Tennessee. It was during this time that he received Clark Lee as his personal body servant from his brother-in-law, James M. Lee. So how do we know all of this? Clark Gordon's compiled service record is housed in the National Archives and Records Administration. In 1921, Clark Lee applied for a pension from the state of Tennessee, and in it, he indicated his owner to be Jim Lee, which is James M. Lee. But let's talk more about the only information Clark Lee left behind: a 1921 Tennessee state pension application. Lee's pension is the foundation upon which his Confederate service has recently been propagated. It's the only true primary source used in printed material to support his service. So let's start by diving into his Confederate Tennessee pension process. On April 9th, 1921, the Tennessee State Assembly passed Senate Bill number 1342, which had two sections. Here's the language of that bill. An act to be entitled, an act to provide pensions for those colored men who served as servants and cooks in the Confederate Army in the War between the States, 1861 to 1865. Section 1. Be it enacted by the General Assembly of the State of Tennessee that the colored men who acted as servants and cooks in the Confederate Army in the War between the States are hereby permitted to make application to the Pension Board for a pension, and when they make proper proof of their service acceptable to said board, that their names be placed upon the pension list, and that they be paid out of the pension fund the sum of $10 per month or $30 per quarter. Section 2. Be it further enacted that the act take effect from and after its passage, the public welfare requiring it. W. W. Bond, the Speaker of the Senate, Andrew L. Todd, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and A. A. Taylor, the Governor, signed the bill. It wasn't long before the newspapers and periodicals picked up Tennessee's pension news. In the Saturday, June 18, 1921 Broadax, published in Chicago, Illinois, a reprinted article from Nashville, Tennessee read, "Every Negro who served in any way his master to receive a pension, according to the act of the Tennessee legislature, the real text of the bill provides a bill to pension Negro cooks and servants. It's estimated that there will be thousands of dollars to give disabled members of the race who saw service with the gray and who were loyal to their masters throughout their career. The introducing and passing of this bill is regarded in this city as the first forward movement throughout the South to give recognition to those loyal members of the race who stood by their slave owners." Printed in Nashville, Tennessee in August 1921, Confederate Veteran Magazine ran an article entitled "Pensions for Faithful Negroes," in which it said, "A new feature in the pension appropriation of Tennessee makes an allowance for pensions to the faithful Negroes who were in the war with their masters and served them until the end." The article continued by saying, "Doubtless other states of the South will make similar provision for their old Negroes who loyally, under the circumstances, showed a fine sense of honor not apparent to later generations of the race." A month after the article in the Confederate Veteran, and 5 months after the pension bill's passage, Clark Lee filed his colored man's application for pension, which was number 107 in the state of Tennessee, on September 16, 1921. On the form, there was a notice to applicants which stated, "The Negroes' pension law passed by the Tennessee legislature provide that the Negroes pensioned by the act must have been actual bona fide residents of this state 3 years if they served with a Tennessee command, and 10 years if they served with a command from any other state. They must have remained with the Army until the close of the war, unless legally relieved from service. They must be indigent. Unless you come clearly under this law, it is useless to file an application. The pension form's wording alone makes it undeniable of the status in which Lee served the Confederacy. He swore the following: I, Clark Lee, a native of the state of Georgia and now a citizen of Tennessee, resident at 1812 Rear Whiteside in the county of Hamilton, in said state of Tennessee, and who was a servant from the state of Georgia in the war between the United States and the Confederate States, do hereby apply for aid under the Act of the General Assembly of Tennessee of 1921. And I do solemnly swear that I was with Colonel Gordon, Colonel Smith of Macon, Georgia, in the service of the Confederate States, and that by reason of indigence, I am now entitled to receive the benefit of this act. I further swear that I do not hold any national, state, or county office, nor do I receive aid or pension from any other state or from the United States. I do further solemnly swear that the answers given to the following questions are true. Here's a sampling of the most pertinent questions related to this program that are found in Clark Lee's pension application. In what county, state, and year were you born? Walker County, Georgia, state of Georgia, near Ringgold. Do not know how old I am. When did you go with the Army? Give the names of the regimental and company officers under which your master served. Left home about 3 weeks before the Battle of Chickamauga. Colonel Gordon, 1st Confederate Georgia Regiment, under General Bragg. Give the name of your owner, Jim Lee. When and where did you leave the Army? Left the Army about 2 days before the surrender, near Goldburg, North Carolina. In addition to his own sworn statement, he had to produce witnesses to his service. According to an article written by Professor James G. Hollingsworth, Jr., the reason for this centered around loyalty. It was a key component to a successful application, and being present at the surrender of his master's unit at the end of the war was evidence that the black applicant had not deserted. This incentive alone would encourage applicants to exaggerate the length of time they had served. Confederate pension boards were aware of these problems, and all 5 states at the time required that at least 2 witnesses, preferably former Confederate soldiers, sign affidavits under oath stating that the information provided by the applicant was accurate. Therefore, Clark Lee needed 2 witnesses. He found them in John B. Henderson and William H. Hill, both veterans of Company D, 1st Confederate Georgia Infantry Regiment. However, there was a catch. Both men stated under oath that we know the applicant was with Colonel Gordon to the end of our service, we being captured at Nashville, December 1864. John B. Henderson was captured at Murfreesboro, Tennessee on December 5, 1864. William H. Hill was captured at Nashville, Tennessee on December 16, 1864. The catch was that the pension board required that pensioners needed to serve until 2 days before an official surrender. Henderson and Hill could not provide that needed information without perjuring themselves. According to Professor Adam Dombey, like Confederate soldiers who accepted African American laborers but rejected the prospect of black soldiers, the Southerners who designed the pension system wanted it clear that ex-slave pensions were not equal to those of white veterans. On Confederate flag stamped letterhead, the Tennessee Board of Pension Examiners sent Clark Lee a letter which stated, "Dear Sir, the board considered your case and disallowed it. It must have proof from persons who know the facts that you served with the Confederate Army until 2 days before the surrender. Your witnesses say that you served to the end of the war in December 1864. If you send in proof, the board will reconsider your case. It took almost 2 years for the issue to be resolved and included correspondence with the pension board from the headquarters of the 1st Division Forest Cavalry Corps in Chattanooga, which was a camp of the United Confederate Veterans. Chattanoogan Joseph F. Shipp wrote Georgia Congressman Gordon Lee on June 16, 1923. I am writing you in the interest of a dear old colored man who states he was before the Confederate War a member of your family. In other words, he was a slave and belonged to your father. I've been interesting myself to get a state pension for him based upon the fact, as he states that he was a body servant during the latter part of the war to Colonel Clark Gordon, your uncle, and remained with him loyal and true to the close of the war, and came home with Colonel Gordon after the surrender of General Johnston's army in North Carolina. If he can establish this record, he will be entitled to a Tennessee state pension under our present pension law, allowing pension to our faithful old slaves who remained true to the close of the struggle to their white folks. I am proud of the fact that I am the author of this bill, making our faithful old slaves who took part in the field during the war. Now, I understand that you are not expected to know these facts on your own knowledge, but I am hoping that you know enough of the facts from a reliable authority that would establish this old man's eligibility under the provisions of the state pension law. Write to me such a letter as you feel justified in doing in regard to this matter, that I may file it with Clark Lee's application for a Tennessee state pension. John N. Johnson, the Major General commanding the local United Confederate Veterans Organization, wrote the Tennessee Pension Board of Examiners Secretary, John P. Hickman, the following on July 13, 1923. As I wrote you that Shipp and I have been trying to get this old man a pension for some time, it seems by your letter that he lacked proper evidence, and he has put himself to a great deal of trouble to locate someone who was with the Army and who knew him and his record. He found old man Crouch, who is now past a-going, is almost blind, and too feeble even to go to the table without assistance. Crouch has made a statement, which I sent you, that Clark Lee was with the Army up to the close of the war and went home with his master after the surrender. Now, if the statement of Crouch is to be certified, you will please let me know by return mail, if possible, and we will arrange to have a magistrate or a notary sent into the country to take his statement. If, however, it can be avoided, we would like to do so. But if it has to be done, it must be done at once, as Crouch is very old and feeble, and is the only one we can lay hands on at this time that was really with Lee at the surrender. Was Crouch the only one that could lay hands on to vouch for Clark Lee and his service to Clark Gordon up to 2 days before the surrender of Johnston's army at Bennett Place in North Carolina? On June 16, 1923, Reuben Couch signed a written statement which read, "This is to certify that Clark Lee, colored, was in the Confederate Army with his master, Colonel Clark Gordon of the 1st Confederate Georgia Regiment Infantry, and that he was with our regiment up to the close of the war. I testify that I saw him in person 2 days before the close of the war. He was with his master, Colonel Clark Gordon, at the time. I was a teamster of this regiment and certify that Clark Lee went home with Colonel Gordon at the close of the war. I'm drawing a pension from the state of Georgia, and you can find out anything you want to know about me from the records of the Pension Bureau of the state of Georgia." One interesting contradiction to his statement in Clark Lee's pension is his whereabouts at the war's close. Georgia Pension question number 7 asked, "Were you present with your company and regiment when it surrendered?" Couch answered no. Georgia Pension question number 8 asked, "If not present, state specifically and clearly where you were, when you left your command, For what cause and by whose authority? Couch answered, at Point Lookout, Maryland, was in prison, was captured in the Valley of Virginia. This statement can be corroborated by looking at Couch's compiled military service record, or CSMR. He did enlist in Company I, 60th Georgia, on May 6, 1862, at Lafayette, Georgia, and was a teamster in the unit. He was also captured on October 19, 1864, in Strasburg, Virginia, during the Battle of Cedar Creek. He wasn't released from Point Lookout until June 20, 1865. Are these the same person? The 1st Confederate Infantry fought in the Western Theater of the Civil War, while the 60th Georgia fought in the war's Eastern Theater. How could Couch swear that he saw Clark Lee 2 days before the close of the war, yet he was in a completely different theater of the war and was imprisoned at Point Lookout, Maryland? Well, yes, this is the same Reuben Couch. How do we know? Because the witness who signed Reuben Couch's statement attesting to his seeing Clark Lee 2 days before the close of the war was Georgia Couch. In his own Georgia Pigeon, Reuben Couch stated that he had 2 single daughters, Sally, age 32, and Georgia Couch, age 30 years. So why the fraud and perjury by Reuben Couch? On June 28, 1923, John N. Johnson wrote John P. Hickman that he drew up the certificate that the old Negro took to him, Couch, but was not able to employ an officer or notary to go with him. Johnson wrote Hickman again, stating that if the statement of Couch has to be certified, that you please let me know by return mail if possible, and we will arrange to have a magistrate or a notary sent into the country to take his statement. If, however, it can be avoided, we would like to do so. But if it has to be done, it must be done at once, as Couch is very old and feeble, and is the only one we can lay hands on at this time that was really with Lee at the surrender. It appears there may have been a dearth of Confederate veterans to choose from at the time, and Couch was the only one available in the area. The statement was typed up by Johnson, and Clark Lee took it to Couch for his signature. One other interesting fact is that in 1860, James Clark Gordon, the officer to whom Lee was a servant, lived a mere 4 houses away from Samuel Couch, whose 25-year-old son, Reuben, was part of the household. Is it a coincidence that the Confederate veteran who was willing to perjure himself was a neighbor of the Gordon family with whom Clark Lee served during the Civil War? Was there a feeling of obligation in trying to see once enslaved African Americans receive pensions? Or was there a more deep-seated motive to the pension system? Professor Adam Dombey argues that ex-slave pensions were purposefully designed as tools for racial control. For example, South Carolina's Slave Pension Act's purpose was to reward the Negroes who were faithful when the war was raging and who remained faithful through the years down to the present. He also argues that pension system can be seen as a continuation of the older patronage systems that evolved out of slavery. In some ways, the pension system mirrored slavery, when elderly enslaved people were at the mercy of white enslavers for the most basic needs. After emancipation, those who stayed friendly with a former master might expect to receive protection and resources when needed. Can we see this in Clark Lee's case? 1/4 of the 280 applicants from African Americans in Tennessee were rejected. Clark Lee would have been in this number had it not been for the assistance of white men pushing his pension through with the help of Reuben Couch, who wasn't even with Lee at the war's end, but was still languishing in a Union prison camp at Point Lookout, Maryland. There's no doubt that Clark Lee went to war with his enslaver's brother-in-law, Colonel Clark Gordon, of the 1st Confederate Georgia Infantry. There were even notarized witnesses who saw him at the time of the Battle of Nashville in December 1864. However, if Couch's testimony had been deemed untrustworthy, Lee would never have received his pension, as he successfully did on July 10, 1923. Lee did not receive his pension based upon his service to the Confederacy in the capacity as a soldier, fighting to keep himself and others happily enslaved by the Lee family. He was taken to war by Colonel Gordon to serve the colonel's interest as a piece of human property. In the end, although he received his $10 per month from the state of Tennessee, Clark Lee had not received truly all that was due him.